Colorado Springs.
Nearly 500,000 people.
Olympic City, USA.
Garden of the Gods.
Pikes Peak.
It's a growing city.
Our local government has a lot of employees. What exactly do they do?
How does it impact my life?
This is where you find out.
Behind the Springs, an inside look at your local government.
And welcome to another edition of Behind the Springs and an important conversation today about the recent protests and discussions in our community and across the country. I'm Ted Skroback.
And I'm Jen Schrader. We're here with Colorado Springs Mayor John Suthers and Colorado Springs Police Chief Vince Niski to discuss the latest events, and thank you both for your time today. We really appreciate it. And Chief, let me get started right with you about the citywide curfew. I think a lot of folks the order expired this morning. So if you can speak about that and then talk about how things went over the weekend for your officers and protesters.
Sure. After we implemented the curfew, after the mayor was, after we had a discussion and implemented the curfew, each night we've continued to see protests, but they've been peaceful. Each day they start around 10 o'clock. We have protesters out at City Hall, and then the numbers continue to grow through the evening. But ever since the curfew was implemented, we have nothing but peaceful protests, we've been very grateful for that. We had some protesters last night come down to the police operations center, but they remained peaceful. Then they came back, they marched back up to downtown Colorado Springs, protested for a while, and then dispersed. What we have seen, too, with a lot of the event organizers, the protest organizers, they are telling people to go home at 10 o'clock. They are asking people to leave and disperse from downtown at the 10 o'clock hour. We've had some stay longer. We've allowed them to stay longer, but they have dispersed usually by 11 or 11:30, and they have not been violent at all. We have been very fortunate. They've remained peaceful throughout the week after the implementation of the curfew.
Okay. And Mayor, at this point, what's happening with the curfew?
Well, because all the protests since the curfew went into place have been nonviolent, we are letting the curfew lapse this morning, and I'm not renewing it. Now, if we see any damage to property or injury to persons or threats to police officers or the public in the future, I wouldn't hesitate to reimpose it if necessary for public safety. But I have to tell you, I have been very impressed by the protesters and the leadership of the protests. What's happened over the last 5 days in Colorado Springs, in my opinion, is in the highest traditions of social action in America. People passionate about a very worthy cause, very vocal about it, but not letting outside influences that have a different message and don't share their methods of nonviolent protest infiltrate and turn things a different direction. So I also have a lot of praise for the police. They have worked very, very hard to protect the right of citizens of Colorado Springs to engage in speech and assembly under the First Amendment and do so in a way that doesn't pose a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of all our citizens.
Well, Mayor, what do you want the residents that are listening or watching the podcast right now to know about where our city leaders stand, not only yourself, but I know you've been having a lot of conversations with City Council as well.
Yeah, first of all, everybody should understand that everybody I've talked to in the city of Colorado Springs is outraged by the incident that led to these protests. The death of George Floyd was outrageous. It was totally uncalled for. I have never in my life, and I've been around police, and I was president or chairman of the police officer standard and training board in Colorado in 10 years. I've never heard of anybody suggest that kneeling on the knee of someone is an appropriate restraint. So universally, people are condemning this act. I think also there's a complete willingness to engage in constructive conversation about what needs to be done going forward. It's interesting to me to see what's being discussed in other parts of the country and to think about what we should be discussing. In many cities in America, the issue is the inability to quickly and efficiently deal with police misconduct. A A lot of the things that they're dealing with are issues that, frankly, we've been able to avoid. For example, public employee unions. I think what a lot of cities are realizing that their collective bargaining agreements that have incredible bureaucracy to get rid of a officer engaging in misconduct they've now come to the realization they're counterproductive. I hope that causes people to understand why I was so emphatic asking the citizens of Colorado Springs to resist collective bargaining for firefighters, because I knew it would lead to the same thing for police officers. And
can you explain for people that don't know what a collective bargaining agreement is?
Yeah. If police and fire or any other public employees have collective bargaining rights, then they have the right to negotiate a contract with the city for, let's say, a period of 3 years. And typically in that contract are lots of provisions about what process you have to go through to be disciplined. And frankly, in a lot of cities, the bureaucracy and process that you have to go through to get someone disciplined is very counterproductive to very efficient, quick discipline in a police department, where that's absolutely what you need. You need to be able to get rid of bad cops very quickly. So it's interesting to see the discussions across the country. Some of them, in my opinion, are totally counterproductive. Defunding a police department or abolishing a police department. It's the police that are responding. We want to stop violence. There's an awful lot of violence that the police are responding to and preventing from happening. And it would be totally counterproductive to have even longer response times for people responding to burglaries in progress or armed robberies and things like that. Let's focus on those things that are really impact the issues that people are talking about. And if I might move into the topic of what I see going forward here, I see some really good conversation between the city council and the mayor's office and our community. I would foresee probably a council appointed committee or commission that would explore how the police and the community can communicate better. The community communicate its issues to the police. Police educate the community about the pressures and problems that they're encountering, and also this whole issue of what's the best method of police accountability. Now, I happen to have a lot of experience in this area, having been chairman of the Police Officer Standard Training Board for 10 years. I will tell you, I do not favor giving a group of unelected citizens who do not have any expertise in policing the power to determine the procedures and protocols of a police department. But I don't have a problem with a group of citizens seeing how the police department operates, looking at how other police departments operate, and making recommendations to the city council as to how we ought to go forward. And I think there can be some constructive conversations there. Quite frankly, there's been a lot of efforts through the years towards police community communication and involvement. We had a illumination project here that went on for a couple of years after a racist incident in Charleston. I think it's time to kind of, in light of this incident and the public discussion, I think it's a time to kind of restart over. And let's, with the cooperation of the citizens, let's decide what this process of communication should look like going forward. So I also think we're going to have to work very, very hard from a recruiting perspective. One of the most counterproductive things happening right now is discussions about holding police officers personally accountable, even when they're acting in good faith. Folks, if nothing else comes out of this, the need to attract the best qualified people to police work, including minorities. We want a police department that reflects the community, and we have to recruit minorities. Well, who's going to join a police department if you can't properly defend yourself, if the laws have gone that direction, or if you suffer the possibility of losing your home and your assets and things like that. We have to be very careful about how we proceed in the midst of some of the rhetoric that's going on in this highly intense time.
I think you brought up a good point too about that community conversation. I know, Chief, you brought up the point of, the consistent need of educating the public about what the police do. And that's something that you all have worked hard on, but you were saying can work even harder.
Yes, we have. We've tried. We have tried to educate the community. We haven't done a very good job. You're right. We have to do a better job. A few months ago, we started to put together a group of leaders, community leaders here in Colorado Springs, to help us form a steering committee of additional community leaders that we could actually have as liaisons to the community, where we could train people on what we do, teach them what we do, and really look at it as a two-way conversation where we would give information to this group would take it out to their communities, and then questions or concerns would be brought back to us that we could address. I can tell you that last Tuesday was one of the best conversations we had in relation to George Floyd. They were very direct, very succinct in what they were seeing in the community, gave us a good idea of what we're trying to. We just need to do a better job of communicating. We know what we do, the community doesn't, and the community really doesn't want to know per se until they need us. And then they hear about something like a George Floyd incident, and then they need to know that we don't do it the way other cities do it.
And what will work and what won't, some of the points that Mayor brought up. Yeah,
exactly. And I had Deputy Chief Vasquez and I had a conversation last week with a couple of the protest organizers, and we've actually invited them to that group because really we need their voice as well as we need community leaders. We've asked them to join that group too, so that we get a voice of the people younger, because a lot of the protesters we see are younger. They're college age or a little older. So we need to get their voice on that committee. I think it'll be really important. It'll be a good way to have communication, to let people know what we've done already to improve the police department, and let them have input on what we do in the future to improve the police department and our relationship with our community.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question for either of you, or Mayor, if you want to start. What happens next? Can you discuss in general what people can expect to see locally?
Well, I think you'll see a couple things. You'll see some demands for some things that, as I say, to the extent that somebody wants a citizen oversight committee that dictates how the police department operates, I'll resist that. It just hasn't worked. I've watched it. I've watched it across the country. Typically, it results in more bureaucracy. It's ironic. Most of citizen oversight, if it has the ability to dictate things to the police department or actually determine the punishment, it results in less efficiency. There was a strangulation case in New York where it took 5 years to get rid of the police officer who had engaged in the misconduct. That's wholly counterproductive, and it was as a result of citizens disagreeing and all that sort of thing. But what I see happening, and what I think would be very productive, is we empower a group of citizens. And I think we have to make sure it's I think we need to let people apply and be chosen, as opposed to kind of a couple of folks self-anoint themselves. I think we have to have a committee of the council, chosen by the council, who will examine, as I say, very specific ways that we can promote citizens telling the police department what their needs are, what their concerns are, the police department educating the public about what they do. I get all kinds of questions from people, well, we ought to have anti-bias training. We ought to have de-escalation training. Folks, we've got that, but we need to show them what that training is and how extensive it is, how much training goes into use of force. I think one of the interesting things you can do is put citizens in that use of force training where they have to decide momentarily whether to shoot or not shoot. And I think they'll find that, man, police officers are a lot more restrained than most people in the public would be under those circumstances because of their training. I see us having much greater citizen police department, citizen government discussion about that sort of thing. I also see us stepping up our game in terms of impressing on people. We have got to counteract this notion. You know, one of my concerns is I see mayors out there standing in front of a line with a sign over their shoulder, cops equal terrorists. That's a totally counterproductive message. The vast majority of our police officers in Colorado Springs are tremendous public servants. They're very dedicated people. They want to do the right thing. We've got to move away from this labeling of all cops as bad, because our future depends on attracting well-educated, well-prepared, the right kind of people in terms of their mentality to police work. And frankly, probably nothing we can do would be more productive to get more minorities. We've got to recruit. We've got a community of 16-70% Latino. We've done a pretty good job in that regard. We've had struggles trying to recruit African Americans. I'm just afraid this is going to make it more difficult. We need to make it. We need to make sure we do a better job of that, and we need the public's help in that regard.
Chief, do you have anything to add?
Do.
Or?
I just want people to know that a couple of years ago, we actually started looking at our use of force policy. We started revamping that policy based on best practices from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. They had some guidelines. We started looking at that. A lot of the emails and voicemails that I'm getting right now are asking for more transparent data to the community. We started that prior again to this incident. We are going to develop a position in the police department that will look at our data and get it in a document that
Accessible.
we can actually, that's accessible
Yeah.
to the community. Yes,
Okay.
because that is one of the big things that people are concerned about. And a lot of the things that you hear other communities asking their police department to do, we're already doing it. We're just not getting the message out. Again, it's our messaging that has been faulty over the years. We have to get a forward-looking document out that the community can look at. And what we really want is the community to look at it and then tell us what else they're looking for.
Right.
And then that position will continue to get the data. It will be updated regularly so that people have the information that they're looking for. I think once
Are you doing what you say you're doing? And then
Exactly.
where do we go from there?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Chief, would you say something about your department's certification and the fact that not many police departments have the certification that you folks have?
Well, we have the state certification from Post, but we also have CLIA certification. We are an accredited organization.
What does CLIA stand for?
It's
Boy, putting them on the
It's
spot.
a law enforcement
Yeah.
accreditation is what
Is
it
it a
is. It's
national?
national.
Yeah. Okay.
It is national.
Okay.
And there are about 18,000 departments, law enforcement departments across the country. We're one of the few that is nationally accredited. They come in, they give us standards that we have to follow. A lot of our policies are dictated by those standards. We've been accredited since, I think it's 1993 or 1998. And we have maintained our accreditation through the last 20, 25 years. We take it very seriously. It mandates a lot of how we do our job, along with post certification. I think it's important for people to know all of our officers are post certified. They have to meet the standards that Post puts out there for every officer in Colorado to meet. And they dictate the training that you go through. They dictate that after you're an officer, what your in-service training is going to be. They mandate that every year as well. And we maintain our certification for all of our employees over and over again.
So really about accountability.
It really is about accountability. There are multiple steps that somebody has to go through to be an officer on the Colorado Springs Police Department.
Well, and Mayor, sounds like you're making a move at maybe being a podcast co-host as well right now with those tough questions over there.
Got some good ones.
But we hit a little bit on the extensive training of CSPD. Some things that I was hearing from some of the protest organizers were asking for more community events from police. But I think that's another thing. Can you tell people what police have already been doing with community events, coffee with the cop, that sort of thing?
We have Coffee with a Cop. We have a youth organization that we were meeting with monthly from high schools. We go out and play soccer with kids on the east side. We have a minority relations group that goes out and meets with minority groups. We have a sergeant and an officer who do community relations, as well as our crime prevention officers in each of the 4 divisions, 1 in each division. They go out and do community events. We have a lot of community-focused officers, community-focused events that we go to. I think what the public's looking for that's been voiced to us is just showing up, maybe not the planned events that we do, but just showing up to a barbecue, just showing up to an event in a park. And we're more than willing to do that. We just have to know about them. And there's so many out there that we have to kind of pick and choose the ones we go to. They just want to see an officer have a meal with the rest of the community or have a coffee like we've done, just to socialize rather than be there for a call for service. And we are committed to doing that.
And that's where that conversation can
That's where
continue also.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you both for your time. I know that's a lot to cover and there's more to come, but we appreciate you being so candid and transparent with us.
Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, and Mayor, is there anything that you want to say to the community as we kind of sign off here?
I reiterate that this is a tragic event, a totally unnecessary use of force by the police. We unanimously stand against that sort of police conduct. No one sanctions police brutality. But I think it's very important that as we move forward, we're careful to make sure we do constructive things to promote greater accountability, promote the ability to deal with police misconduct more efficiently, more quickly, as opposed to do things to make it harder to attract good people to the profession and attract more minorities to the profession of law enforcement, which is something we fundamentally need to do. So let's keep this conversation very rational, but let's have a very robust conversation going forward as to how we can improve policing in America.
Well,
If I could, I'd just like to add, I really do believe those officers discredited their uniform in Minneapolis and really embarrassed my profession. And now the rest of us are dealing with it. The rest of us are trying to get our communities to understand where we stand with our communities.
And that's another good point to make. I think police all around the country are just as frustrated with what happened in Minnesota as everybody else in the country. And I also want to say as well, the lines of communication, which we've kind of touched on, are open with the organizers of the protests locally. And I think everything that you guys have talked about, there's going to be some really positive things to come from this in the future, and very short future too. It seems like there could be some movement very soon.
And before we go, Ted, if I could just mention and encourage folks who are interested to follow the City of COS and also the Colorado Springs Police Department on social media, whatever platform you choose, they're there, and that's a good source of information for folks.
Exactly. Well, thanks for watching and listening to another edition of Behind the Springs, a very important edition of Behind the Springs. Please rate, like, subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts.